Just to confirm, you did the open assessment route.
I did, yes.
Can you tell us what you gained from completing your open assessment and identifying any outcomes from doing that?
So when I went through the open assessment, I went in there a little bit naive, thinking, yeah, it's 48 choice, multiple choice questions, it's going to be a breeze. And far from that was it a breeze. It tested my level of knowledge and understanding of the questions, which then I had to research, do a lot of research in terms of clarification of what was being asked of me. So I went into that process very, very naive, come out the other side, you know, and it did test my knowledge base. It does put you under the pressure, 48 multiple choice questions in 3 hours. You think it's going to be a breeze, but it wasn't. But from that, I learned various new ways of researching certain information to get clarity on certain points. Reached out to certain organisations, and I've taken that with me following doing the open assessment.
Okay, which kind of organisations did you reach out to for the information that you required?
So multiple. So I reached out to IOSH, I reached out to the HSC, but I also reached out to local organisations that I was subscribed to gain relevant information. Forums. There's you know, just typed in health and safety support, health and safety forums, guidance. You know, there's a lot of information out there for me to get the answers that I needed to.
Okay, which part of the OA did you have problems with? Was it the multiple choice questions or was it part B?
So I would say the multiple choice was a testing process. Mm-hmm. Not so much where you have to choose the right one-word answer, it's where you get given a certain sentence and you have to examine that sentence to make sure that you're choosing the right one. That was the most testing thing for me. Mm-hmm. Didn't expect it, and it was a bit of a curveball.
Okay. And what were the lessons learned from from completing the open assessment?
Not to be so naive. Not to be so naive, to ensure that you are aware of what resources are available to help you get through these particular cases, because in the real world you may be faced with a question or a comment or a situation where you don't necessarily know the answer, and it taught me to, if I didn't know the answer, just to take a step back, trying to find out the actual information needed before going then forward and submitting my answer, or giving advice in the real world, so to say.
And does it change your working practices?
Absolutely, yeah, 100%. You know, it's about measuring twice and cutting once. You know, it's all about preparation. Poor preparation is poor performance. Okay. So it's all about understanding what's being asked of you, and how you then get that information and then apply it to the current situation.
Okay, good, thank you. John, any?
Nothing from me.
Darren?
No, nothing.
Okay. I'll hand you over to John and he'll carry on with some of the other questions.
Right, Mark, how do you keep your health and safety knowledge up to date? I mean, I see you've already mentioned IOSH and HSC and local organisations and forums.
One thing, obviously I'm not an individual pool of knowledge, so I subscribe to various organisations such as IOSH, which is Legislation Update Services, which keeps part updated of all legal changes and how they affect me as an organisation. I also get newsletters from these subscriptions. Getting involved with IOSH has been a big, massive help for me as a professional. Being part of a massive pool of members and support mechanisms who you can just call upon by a phone call or an email. If you've got any concerns, you can then just put it out to those guys. Yeah. But also there's forums such as the IOSH official group on LinkedIn. It's a brilliant forum if you've got any issues or concerns or want anything ratified. There's a massive pool of people there ready and waiting just to contribute and help. So that was a massive help for me.
Yeah. What about at work? Do you have any?
Absolutely, yeah. So currently where I work, there is a matrix of managers who support me through health and safety. So we have the health and safety director, and all of the senior management are fully trained in health and safety, IOSH qualified. So they've been exposed to health and safety as well. So as a team, you know, if there's something that I'm not quite sure of, we then just collate as a team, and within the team we'll then find out the relevant answer and the best way to apply that within the organisation.
Why do you think this is important?
You've got to make sure you're keeping up to date with legislation changes. For example, one thing that is forever changing is exposure limits. And if exposure limits are changing, like for instance, you know, we look at IOSH and the exposure to some chemicals like silica dust, or it may be, you know, sulfuric acids or whatever the case may be. If you're not up to date with those changes, fundamental changes, which is going to have a massive impact on someone's safety and well-being, it is quite serious. So ensuring that you've got these forums, these subscriptions, newsletters, and other support mechanisms is absolutely critical in terms of what's relevant for my organisation.
And you've got all this information, you gathered it all and that. What do you do with it? How do you pass it on?
Well, part of that is part of the management review. We have a formal senior management team review who are jointly responsible for the management systems, but making sure that we've got effective communication across the organisation, and that's from all levels, not just written but spoken. If we leave it just to written communication, there's an element of it being misinterpreted. So we'd rather get out there on the shop floor, speak to the people, get feedback, and make them understand what the actual changes mean in English. Because a lot of top-level changes within legislation isn't necessarily get understood on the shop floor. So it's down to me and the management team then to understand the change, convert it into real English, and then communicate that out to the guys on the shop floor.
You get your feedback to know that it's been understood.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, great. That's it from me, Mark. Darren, move on. So, explain how you would develop health and safety policies, procedures or processes.
Okay, so one thing I learned whilst doing my diploma was a method called input, conversion, output. And simply explained, input is relevant to the subject matter that you are looking at implementing, whether that be a driver's policy, whether it be a wellbeing and occupational health monitoring service, or whether it just be a review of risk management. It's about making sure that you know what input that you want to get, and then collating all the relevant information. Firstly, starting with our legal obligations. We need to ensure what we need to do to make ourselves legal compliant. And then also what we need to do is what we're trying to achieve at the end. What do we need to integrate into that policy or procedure to make it effective? So once we've gathered all the input, all the data that we need, we then go on to the conversion stage. This is where myself and the senior management team will sit down. It may not be all of us, maybe just a set few, maybe just be me. But it's where we convert that information, setting out the policy statements, setting out the legal requirements and the arrangements to make that policy effective and valued within the organisation. Once we've done the conversion, we then formulate that around the management team for them to ratify the document that we then put together. Once we get confirmation from all the management team that it meets what we're expecting, the systems are sufficient and the arrangements are what was agreed, it will then get passed via the senior management team and then ready for the output part of the process. Now the output part of the process is about making sure that people across the organisation are aware of this policy or procedure rather than just a document that's sat in the health and safety manual. So we do that in various ways. We do that by toolbox talks, team sessions. It may even mean specific levels of training and competence regarding that policy. And we would ensure that we get full sign-off from everyone within the affected areas or department regarding that policy or procedure.
And how do you identify the positives and the negatives?
Well, feedback is very important, you know, so it's not just about you get it right the first time. It's about going back once it's been implemented for a month, 2 months, 3 months, and then get some feedback, review it annually maybe, you know, at the very least. But certainly in the infancy of the new policy and procedure, you would aim to get active feedback from all participating candidates.
And how do you implement these feedbacks or lessons learned?
Forums, you know, open forums, open communication. The most effective way of success is opening it up to every person within the organisation. You know, the good, the bad and the ugly, you know, taking those on board and reviewing that back with the management team.
You mentioned in your presentation about ground zero. So did you actually have, did you do that yourself, or was it your organisation that did it and you?
I led the focus. The vision was the vision of the organisation, which was seeded by myself, and it was about ensuring that the management team bought into that level of implementation. You know, it may be small visions to start off with, but it's about building up those elements of safety and the importance of safety systems. But once we got the management on board and they understood the vision, because trying to achieve something without a vision is very difficult. You know, it's hard to imagine something that isn't there. You know, so it's about giving them the tools and the information to make that happen. And once we'd got the management on board and they understood the value and they understood the vision, then downstream it was a lot easier to achieve rather than going upstream.
Good. Wow.
Yeah, I just got one question. What would be a driver for developing a policy?
Continual improvement. You know, if there may be several factors. There may be a new piece of legislation that come out which would drive a review of that document. There may be another element of best practice that has been identified that you'd want to implement into that policy or procedure.
Okay, thank you, Darren.
Yeah, you mentioned during the process of developing the policy the use of the senior management team. Do you use any other individuals within your organisation as part of the implementation, and if so, can you explain who they are?
There may be some people outside the organisation actually, depending on what it is. If we've not got the level of competency or understanding regarding something, for example, it may be CalMar, it may be DGSA, we would then look to get an external person who is deemed competent to provide guidance and information regarding that if we needed to.
On to the next question. So looking at risk assessments now, can you explain how you would carry out risk assessments and how you would prioritise risk controls from these?
Yes, absolutely. So within the organisation that I work with at the moment, we analyse all the activities across the organisation.
Just interject there. When you answer as I rather than we, because we want to see what your input is into a risk assessment.
Noted. So, as being the lead person for risk management, I've developed a risk management profile for the organisation, down to site specific and department specific. Each activity then is risk rated using the risk matrix, number 125. We actually use 3 different versions, 1 to 25, high, medium and low, and red, amber, green. All these indicate areas of control. For instance, the standard is that we review risk assessments annually, which would be a low risk. But then medium-sized risks would be amber, and high risk would be red. But then that would lead us then to a review process of either 3 months, 6 months or 12 months. So we've got various different matrices within the risk management profile that enables me to identify when the reviews are. So we would then look at the risk rating of each individual action, prioritise them in terms of that identification, and then undertake the risk assessments and identify any potential legal gaps, legal compliance gaps or system-based gaps.
Okay, so that's looking at the management sort of side of risk assessments. Can you talk me through an example of how you've carried out a risk assessment?
Absolutely. So some of them have been due to being reactive. You know, we often undertake activities where we may not have identified it on the risk register. So therefore, I then review the potential scenario, the activity, whether it be the use of a forklift truck, for example. So the use of a forklift truck has multiple of different risks, from pedestrian and vehicle segregation to overturning of the piece of equipment, making sure that the person's competently trained. You know, if they're not competently trained, it's going to severely raise the risk profile of that particular activity. And it's just looking at all various different, so the environment may have a major contribution factor to the level of risk, where if you're driving in the yard area as opposed to in an isolated area, the risk levels there are going to be different.
Okay, so how do you come up with the risk assessment, high, medium or low?
So there is a hierarchy of control.
Right.
Okay.
Talk me through that, yeah.
So the hierarchy of control, there's many different ones out there, but the one is ERIC PD, eliminate, reduce, isolate, control, PP and discipline, in that order. So we aim to eliminate the risk rather than put in a personal protective equipment as a control. We'd rather engineer something out. So there is a guidance leaflet that I used, 5 steps to risk assessment, which was a fundamental guidance for me when I was setting out in doing risk assessments.
So talk me through the 5 steps then.
So the five steps in terms of the eliminating the risk, we would look at engineering controls. We would look at where we can best force. I need to review my answer on that one. So it's okay.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So the 5 steps are you're looking at the risk, who might be harmed.
Yep.
So carry on through that if you can.
So yeah, so we look at the activity.
Yeah.
We look at who might be harmed, the level of risk of that, the likelihood, and the controls that we have in place for that.
That's good. Right, Mark?
Not fine on it.
Yeah, you've mentioned the reason for the risk assessments of the review periods regarding high, medium, low, or 1 to 25 and so on. Are there any other reasons that you'd review your risk assessments?
Yes, absolutely. So we would review assessments if we had new pieces of equipment, changes in equipment, changes in process. Obviously, you know, you mentioned about if there's a reactive reason why we would, but mainly if we had new pieces of equipment, or there may be some legislation changes which dictate the reason why we need to review a risk assessment, whether it be an exposure limit, or whether it be a certain level of control needed for that.
Okay, and what about internal statistics that you'd probably use as any type of statistics?
Absolutely. We'd always look at best practice, you know, looking at the HSE results from various bits of information, and looking at that, you know, looking at death rates and how we can then assist in making a reduction or best practice more applicable.
Thank you.
Nothing more from me. Hand over the questions to you now, Dan.
Okay, Mark. The next question from me then is regarding the methodology of incident investigations, root causes and remedial actions. So what is the purpose of carrying out an accident incident investigation? And if possible, if you can give me an example of one that you've carried out.
So for me, the main reason for carrying out an accident investigation is to understand the root cause. Fundamentally, you know, we didn't want an undesired event to happen, so the part of the investigation is to identify what actually happened, factual information throughout that normal activity, which we would expect to identify some of those risks within the risk assessment. So the investigation would therefore take part in looking at witness statements, trying to get some factual information around the event leading up to that point of the incident, any mitigating circumstances that may have caused it, and also looking into what systems were currently in place up until that point. So yeah, that's kind of what I would look into.
And can you give me an example of an incident investigation or accident investigation you've been involved in?
Absolutely.
And what role you played in that?
Yes, so there was an incident where it was a V&A truck, which is a very narrow aisle truck, going down an aisle 15 metres high, carrying a pallet of chocolate spread. And due to the defects within the guide rails, it put the V&A off track. The pallet of chocolate spread came off the truck and went crashing into the racking, wiping out the legs of the racking. In its racking was on an excess of 500 tonnes of product. So controlling that area was very, very key and critical. It's how to critical because there could have been a racking collapse. So I then took the lead role in controlling that area, ensuring that the only people needed to be there were key emergency personnel and the likes of directors who notoriously want to be nosy, was to push them off in the right direction. So, you know, we made the area safe, got the emergency services contacted, got the area under control, and then it enabled us then to make the area safe and then collate the necessary information to get the facts of what led up to causing this incident.
Okay. And what lessons were learnt from that process?
The importance of checklists. The importance of checklists has never been so important. Rather than it being a tick box exercise, it turned out that there was just one screw, one bolt that hadn't been checked throughout the racking inspection. That was loose, which made that guide rail out of line, which then fundamentally caused the accident. So if the checklist had actually been done in its fullest, that would have been identified and could have been completely avoided just through making sure that the right checks are done.
Okay. And how did you roll that information out to people to prevent that running on?
So firstly, we had a talk with all the competent drivers who were the V&A drivers to talk through the findings with those guys. We then sat down with the racking inspectors to identify and show them the importance of making sure that every single element of the checks are done fully. And then we did a toolbox session with all the other staff members just to share with them lessons learned and the importance of checklists, not just within racking inspections, but anything across the organisation.
Okay, thank you. Anything more?
Did you use any particular methodology to get to the root cause for that particular incident?
5-way analysis assisted us greatly in that. Just every time we had a question, we asked ourselves why until we got to the root cause.
Yeah, good system.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing from me, thanks.
Next question then, Mark, is forms of active monitoring and carrying out monitoring activities. So what is your belief in the importance of active monitoring?
Absolutely fundamental. For example, where you are working in an organisation where you have various risks such as exposure limits, ensuring that you have active monitoring over their well-being is very important. For instance, if you're working alongside any kind of chemicals, such as chrome, such as lead, it is actively important that we ensure that we monitor the levels of exposure to those guys. But it could be something like silica dust, with an extremely low exposure limit. Making sure that we have air monitoring, because the importance of knowing if we're on the verge of being outside of that exposure limit is quite crucial. But also just referring back to just general occupational health monitoring. So not necessarily a physical symptom, but it could be around mental health and well-being. It could be around stress, anxiety. If we can identify these things in advance by providing support and guidance to the associates, it's going to benefit them staying in work rather than being off for lost time, or whether it be their mind then wanders, and then due to their lack of focus, then that contributes to an accident. So the fact of active monitoring has a multitude of benefits.
Okay, and can you give me some examples, or a example of active monitoring that you've carried out?
Yeah, absolutely. So I lead the actual occupational health management system. So that is an annual system that we do, where we monitor every single person from hand and arm vibration to musculoskeletal, to hearing, to their skin, whether that be nasal ulcers or anything of that kind of nature. So I actually lead that program at the moment. And any issues that arise there, I've got a system in place then to refer those, and then we'll look at the risk assessment. We'll then look at the work activity, we'll look at the level of training that's currently provided, and whether we need to do anything else to ensure that those exposures and impacts are reduced.
Right, and what's your process of ensuring all that happens as part of your system you've developed?
Say that again, sorry?
What systems and processes you use to make sure all this is carried out?
We aim for these kind of systems to be most autonomous. So we employ it is a subscription by an occupational profession who give us the support through occupational nurses, through automated scheduling, and we ensure we have a communication schedule sent to all the management team with the dates of occupational health monitoring throughout the year.
What are the common forms of monitoring that you do? You talked a lot about health, etc. On a day-to-day basis, is there any other common forms of active monitoring?
Absolutely. So we do active workplace monitoring in terms of safety audits. Site safety audits and inspections. It could be racking inspections. It could be management system walkarounds. So they're just a couple of examples of other kinds of monitoring that we do. Low level, it is, could I say, forklift truck checks is active monitoring. We'd rather check something that the work equipment that we have is free from defect, at the very basic level. Even making sure that we're checking first aid kits, rather than making sure that we have the stuff, rather than needing the stuff and it's not there.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. So next question then is understanding of legislation and best practice relevant to your field of expertise. So can you explain what you understand by the term best practice in the health and safety?
Absolutely. So I actually focused quite a little bit on this, and what I mean by that is we apply our legal compliance, making sure that we're legally compliant with something. So for example, let's use first aid as an example here. We have a legal obligation to meet a set criteria of first aid provisions in the workplace, first aid stations across the different departments, IOSH stations, etc., etc. So when we're looking at best practices for me is about going above and beyond what the expectation is from a legal perspective, making sure that you don't just have the bare minimum. For example, putting defibrillators within an organisation. You know, it is not a legal requirement, but therefore by implementing defibrillators in the organisation, where they're going above and beyond what is required to ensure that we can maintain an effective system to keep people well within the workplace. So if something does happen untoward, we have the systems in place to support them. That for me is the basic concept of best practice, going above and beyond what the legal expectation is. It's just about continual improvement.
Okay. And why do you feel it's important to deliver best practice within your organisation?
I think where we can identify improvement is always a positive, never a negative. If we can therefore prevent, someone having an incident or an accident by applying best practice measures, then that's got to be a positive thing.
Okay. And can you give me an example of a best practice that you've undertaken?
So, when for example, respirator control, although there's no real exposure limits within the organisation that I work with, when guys are doing cleaning maintenance, we therefore ensure that they have a particular grade of respiratory protection on to ensure that they remain safe. There's no expectation of that, but it's just making sure that we go above and beyond. Air-fed respirators, where we feel there may be some contaminants, making sure that we ensure we put those in place. Not necessarily a requirement where there's no real exposure limits, but also, it's just about protecting the person, making them feel comfortable in the work activities that they undertake, making sure that they're comfortable. Because if they're comfortable and competent in what they're doing, they're going to do a better job. So it's just about listening to those guys, what they feel is going to be effective, from physical protection and system protection, just going above and beyond.
Okay. You mentioned the cleaning maintenance and going above and beyond with the masks and respirators. What sorts of information did you look into to understand what type of mask that you were looking for and what you purchased? So
it depends on what the guys are working with. So whether it be vapors, whether it be particulates. But EH40 is a real good document there to establish what exposure limits are there and what controls are needed. Looking at the safety data sheet, speaking with suppliers, and looking at what protection is used as best practice.
Right, yes. The last question is on the IOSH Code of Conduct. Excuse me. What does the IOSH Code of Conduct mean to you as a health and safety professional?
So, a part of the reflection of the activities I undertake, which I have to record for my CPD compliance, the Code of Conduct is really the foundation of me as a professional. The respect, integrity, competence, and service is absolutely the fundamental 4 pillars that I refer to all the time. I don't know that the Code of Conduct off by heart, but the pillars I certainly do, and I apply them in every little thing that I do as a practitioner.
Okay. Do you want to elaborate on those 4 pillars?
So in terms of competence, when we had our fire risk assessment completed, I complete risk assessments all the time. But then I looked at the competence requirements for completing a fire risk assessment and didn't feel competent in doing that, having that level of expertise and knowledge. So therefore I went out and ensured that I got someone who had that level of competence, who could look at it in the finest amount of detail. In terms of integrity, being respectful to all my fellow associates all of the time, being an active listener, making sure that, you know, I don't compromise my own integrity. And what I mean by that is always doing the right thing. Do the right thing, work together and get results.
And service.
Yeah, so in terms of service, this is making sure that if I provide a particular service to anybody, that I have the necessary insurances, making sure that I am above board in terms of providing those services to my fellow associates.
Okay. Have you got an example where you've actually applied the code or been compromised by trying to apply any part of the code?
There's been multiple times where my patience have been tested, and I have had to maintain my code of conduct, as I call it, bite my tongue, where you may come up against management challenges where they don't necessarily want to implement the change, don't really understand the change, and are quite abrupt about the fact. So there's been times where I've really had to bite my tongue and maintain my professional integrity and just be respectful, get myself out of that situation and just go back with facts to prove what I'm trying to achieve or what I'm telling the guys.
Okay, thank you. And your CPD at the moment, can you tell me where that is up to? Absolutely.
So I actively update my CPD. I've got a reminder in my Outlook calendar to update my CPD every month. So following my IOSH meetings and branch events. Also when I attend the likes of the Health and Safety Expo or undertake a risk assessment, I'll make sure I take 5-10 minutes just to update my CPD with that.
Can you remember what your last entry was that you put in there?
Yes, my last entry was when I came to the last branch event, which is about business continuity.
And have you got anything planned, course-wise to...
Yes. So I'm looking at more risk management courses to better understand and manage all elements of risk, not just physical risk, but business risk, to assist with the business continuity programme.
Okay. John, have you anything else to us?
Thank you.
Darren? Okay. Well, that's the end of the interview. Have you got anything to add?
No, thank you. No, I'm all fine, thank you.
Okay. Well, where do we go from here? Within 21 days, you'll hear from IOSH in writing with respect to the result of today's interview. We'll convene and see what we feel the score is going to be, and then we'll hand it over to IOSH and they'll do some summation, and you'll have the result within 21 days. That would be either a letter or an email. Okay. Just like to wish you every success for the future.
Thank you.
And good luck with the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.